Hey everybody, it's Mike for the Mike Wagner Show, powered by SonicWeb Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs, and brought to you by our official sponsor of the Mike Wagner Show, international war-ring author Mia Mulson's The Missing, available on Amazon and paperback and ebook. We're here with a terrific gentleman who is an attorney, science teacher, and a two-time national best-selling New York Times best-selling author. He co-authored the Plague series, which is the Plague of Corruption, and the Ending Plague with Dr. Judy Mikovits and Dr. Francis Rush. We'll talk about that. And he's also the unofficial biographer of the Project Veritas Whistleblowers, and also the author of 14 books, 4 of which became national bestsellers. And his new book is a rare behind-the-scenes insight into the science and politics of, yes, the virology community and big tech involvement that disseminate the American public, and it is Presidential Takedown, and how Anthony Fauci, the CDC, had basically the NIH and the WHO conspired to overthrow President Trump. And he's showing off the book here. And live, ladies and gentlemen, from the Plus Studios in beautiful Northern California, the author of Presidential Takedown with Dr. Paul Elias Alexander, and two-time New York best-selling author, ladies and gentlemen, the multi-talented Kent Heckenlively. Kent, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Mike.
Well, it's great to have you on board, Ken. So you're an attorney, science teacher, and two-time New York Times best-selling author. You also co-authored the Plague series. You also collaborate with Dr. Judy Mikovits, and also unofficial biographer of the Project Veritas Whistleblowers Project. You're author of 14 books, 4 became national bestsellers, and you have a brand new book, which is a rare behind-the-scenes insight into the science and politics of the virology community and the big tech involvement that's disseminating the American public, which is basically the Presidential Takedown, the brand new book, how Anthony Fauci, the CDC, NIH, and the WHO conspired to overthrow President Trump. Before getting all that, Kent, tell us how I first got started.
Well, I've always wanted to be a writer. That's something I wanted to be since I was 13 years old. When I was 14 years old, I sent my first science fiction story way to Analog magazine, for those who remember that story. And
Wow.
So I also spent many years trying to be a screenwriter. And eventually in 2011, I met Dr. Judy Mikovits, and I realized that her story would be great for a book. And when she got in trouble, as I predicted she would, she called me up and said, okay, it's time to write that book. And so since that time, it's just been one whistleblower after another. I feel like I'm becoming the whistleblower guy. So when these people have amazing stories, the publishers call me up and say, hey, Kent, do you want to take this one on? Which is exactly what happened with Presidential Takedown. My publisher, Tony Lyons, over at Skyhorse Press, called me up and said, hey, I got a story for you. And I said, okay, what is it? And he says, it's Dr. Paul Elias Alexander, who was the senior pandemic advisor to the COVID-19 task force, because he had a background in evidence-based medicine, and because he was trying to bring actual science to the COVID-19 task force. After about 5.5 months, they figured out a way to kick him out and ruin his reputation. And so I'm the guy that gets brought in, kind of like Mr. Wolf in Pulp Fiction, to clean things up and tell the real story.
And certainly does as well, too. We get more into that. And what was that one precise moment that simply influenced you into what you're doing for the rest of your career?
I have a child with autism who's vaccine injured. And so when I saw that happen so dramatically, I knew I would lose friends and family members who kind of bought the reigning narrative that vaccines don't have anything to do with autism. And as this kind of fake news epidemic has taken over the world, I always say that I feel like the autism community was patient zero of this fake news epidemic. And so I knew a lie when I heard it. As an attorney, we're trained to ask questions and listen for answers. And one of the things that's been most dramatic in my books with Dr. Judy Mikovits is, she had published in the journal Science with her groundbreaking discovery of a virus linked to chronic fatigue syndrome and probably autism. And, she has become probably one of the most vilified people in the world, probably after Dr. Andrew Wakefield. And the thing that we don't see is we don't see people attacking our books on the merits, on our questioning about where these viruses came from, how people are becoming sick. It's just they do ad hominem attacks on Dr. Mikovits. And, I was also fortunate enough to have a bit of a hand in putting together that 26-minute pandemic interview with Dr. Mikovits, which ended up being seen by more than 1 billion people. So it's been a wild ride, but I think I'm just one of those straight arrow kind of guys. And so when you lie to me, I get mad. And when
I promise to tell the truth, sir. I promise to tell the truth.
Yeah, I am just about as straight arrow a guy as you're ever going to meet. And so, as I put these books together, I mean, I make some provocative, assertions. I think I'm really good in, backing up what I say with my citations. I mean, usually in my books, there's anywhere from 250 to 750 footnotes in my books. And so I've done my homework, and then I make my assertions and I ask my questions. And what happens is there's this enormous silence back from the other side. With the assertions that I've made, if I was a liar, I should have been sued like 50 or 100 times by now. Nobody has ever sued me for defamation, for making some really very serious charges about leading figures in science. And so, I'm just going to keep writing my books, and sometimes they hit big, like they did with Plague of Corruption, and other times with my Project Veritas whistleblowers. I mean, I've done 2 books, Google Leaks and Behind the Mask of Facebook. I would have expected those books to really take off. I've got a 3rd book coming out with my Project Veritas whistleblowers next February called This Was CNN. It goes behind the scenes of the cable news giant. But I'm kind of the guy who gets brought in to take these stories, fashion them. One of the things that I will say is that with my 14 books, I've got over 10,000 Amazon customer reviews. I'm at an average about 4.7 out of 5 stars. So, anybody who's published a book knows that when you publish a book, maybe you can get, your mom and your uncle to give you a 5-star review, but that's about it. And so these books have been widely read. When they have been read, they have, people love them. They say that I open their eyes to something, and I do it in a manner which is really looking at the system of corruption rather than, the individuals of the moment.
I can see what you're saying too. And what intrigued me about the book Behind the Mask of Facebook, of course, there have been some problems. Of course, there's the algorithms. Of course, there's all the false reports and everything else, and the divisions going on, and maybe just a bit about it. And have you covered the algorithm principle in Facebook, or is that all made up, or is that more of a conspiracy? That's what I was curious about.
Well, what was really interesting in the Facebook story is that I wrote it with a whistleblower named Ryan Hartwig, and he was a content moderator. And, like me, he was kind of a straight arrow. I mean, he'd been, worked a lot of security jobs before that. He had a degree in Spanish language and was a fluent Spanish speaker. And even though he's blonde hair, blue eyed, perfect Spanish speaker. And, he was originally hired at Facebook to moderate the Latin American feed, because there was a lot of the cartels were using Facebook to show pictures of them murdering Mexican police officers or torturing people, and they wanted that off. And so, he was told basically his job as a content moderator was to go after the cartels and keep kiddie porn and porn off of the site. And there was like a mission creep at Facebook. And I think it's really important to understand that. For example, one of the things in that story was that Facebook came up with this policy that you couldn't call anybody filth. Okay. And you say, oh, okay, well, it's on a public platform, that's kind of nice. If I go out in public and somebody calls me filth, he might get punched in the face. So not a bad idea. Well, then the exceptions started creeping in. So during Gay Pride Month, it was allowed that if you were gay, you could call somebody who is straight filth if they didn't agree with your agenda. And you find this, it constantly starts shifting, and it always shifts in a certain direction. And they had the same thing with policy about nudity, no women's breasts. But when the lesbians started protesting during Gay Pride Month by walking around topless, they figured, oh, that's free speech. We got to show that. And then there were just multiple examples of, you could call somebody a Trump humper, but you couldn't call somebody a libtard. And so, all these sorts of things. I mean, I kind of felt like I was back in the 1960s with Lenny Bruce, in terms of like the 10 words you can never say on television.
Oh, yes. And then he got the 7 words of George Carlin. I remember those. Yes.
Yeah. And so it's kind of funny, because my co-author on that he's a Mormon guy. And, there's me, the straight arrow, and there's the Mormon guy. And we're talking about like, oh, well, which curse words can be allowed? Which curse words cannot be allowed? And it's really sort of disheartening because, what he had done was he had originally come up with 17 things that he thought were violations of their policy and not conducive to, a free society. He sends this letter off to, a whole bunch of politicians, gets no response whatsoever. And then, he contacts Project Veritas and goes, secretly records all of these crazy conversations with people, which, it has become all too common. And, there's this interesting phrase that's being used now called narrative poisoning.
Yes, I think I've heard something about that.
And I think that's really a good way of thinking about it because, I live in California. I'm kind of surrounded by liberals, right?
Mhm.
Liberals are wonderful people, they care about a lot, but, on some things they just get nutty. And this whole idea that they've been poisoned by this narrative that they genuinely believe. I mean, here I am supposed to be this fire-breathing conservative author, but I'm really one of the nicest people you're ever going to meet. I give you a shirt
Oh, there's
off
no
my
question.
back. Yeah, and so there really is this narrative poisoning that's gone on, and I kind of feel like all of my books are kind of looking at various aspects of narrative poisoning, whether it's in science or big tech, and this presidential takedown is really in politics because he's got some amazing stories, and if I can share a couple stories from the book, one of the things that basically got him fired was that he was arguing in August and September of 2020 that kids should be back in school. Okay, and so and he always abundantly documents everything that's in our book, and so he sent me the emails that he was exchanging with members of the COVID-19 task force. He shows how he's got all of these studies of kids and things saying, and basically it's kind of interesting scientifically, which is the COVID-19 virus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, enters the cell through something called the ACE2 receptor.
Mm-hmm.
But the ACE2 receptor has to be open in order for that virus to get in. It's almost, think of it like a flower that it needs to be open for the bee to land on it to get the pollen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the ACE2 receptor is not active in children. So what that means is that, they may test positive for it. their viral load is extremely low. They don't get sick. They may not even know they have it, and it's not a problem. And, it's understandable why in the beginning, say March, April, the schools got closed down because they didn't really know what this virus was. They thought it was going to be like influenza, which does spread throughout the young and can be very serious. But in August and September of 2020, it was pretty clear that it did not. And so one of the things that happened was that he was very aggressive in sending these letters out, saying that Dr. Fauci needs to understand this. I'm happy to meet with him anytime. And what happened probably about a week or two after that was that there were a number of scientists from the CDC who were visiting Washington, D.C. They met with Paul and they said, we've heard you on all these Zoom meetings. We really like what you're saying. You do follow the science. But we have to tell you that you have embarrassed Fauci. And Fauci has made the decision that you will be fired.
Really?
And he said, well, is there anything I can do? I'm happy to go meet with him, apologize to his face. I'm happy to, write an email to everybody who got the original email saying, I'm sorry if my tone was wrong, anything. And they said, no, the decision has already been made. They're going to cut your balls off, and you just have to be ready for it to happen. We really like you, and we just think you should know this is coming. And I found myself going like, I'm so deeply offended by that because, I believe in rationality. I believe in the scientific process. I'm a science teacher. Okay. This is, for the past 15 years, I've been a science teacher. I was 15 years before that. I was an attorney. But there's a process we go through to find out the truth. And it is not this mafia talk. It is people speaking rationally, unemotionally about what is necessary for the public to do. I take that very seriously. And the other thing that Dr. Alexander shared with me, and that maybe to some people this is a little bit problematic, but he was there and I wasn't, and we weren't. So when he tells me this, I think it's important enough to put into the book. But as the senior pandemic advisor, he was given access to the executive lunchroom at Health and Human Services. So it's during the pandemic. There, it's a skeleton crew. You're getting all the heads of the departments there. And Dr. Alexander is kind of an interesting character because he is originally Middle Eastern and North African, born and raised in Trinidad, emigrated to Canada when he was like 18 or 19 years old. Wow. So he's a dark-skinned man. He speaks with a charming Caribbean accent. But when these heads of departments saw him and heard him, they just could not wrap their brains around the fact that he might be conservative.
Really?
And so they would talk to him and they'd go, brother, here's the deal. You don't want to be with Trump. Let me tell you. Here's what's going on. Every day, as the head of my department, my job is to make Trump look as bad as he can on the evening news. And I'm thinking to myself, well, gee, do you have any evidence of that? And I mean, that's the way, reason I say, like, well, what do I do with this information? This is something who's a senior government official told me about it. And I figured, like, I'm going to put it in the book because I think it's important for people to know. But I find myself going, if that's true, that's one of the most disturbing things, that in the midst of the greatest public health crisis of the past century, heads of departments weren't interested in the public. They were interested in making President Trump look bad. And there's one other thing that he shared with me, which, when you're a writer, you're always looking for that detail to
Hmm.
suggest honesty, to say, like, help me understand this. And he talked about how when he would have conversations with these people, they would often use the expression, we in the bureaucracy think.
Oh yeah, I heard that bureaucracy speak all the time. You all fluff the words and everything, but really it's like nothing. It's like a paper tiger defense. Looks ferocious but ineffective.
Well, but I think to myself, that's really an inversion of our form of government, because our form of government is we the people,
Right.
meaning we have the power. And to wrestle with that idea that the bureaucracy doesn't respond to a Republican president or a Democratic president who doesn't follow the company line is genuinely terrifying to me.
Hmm.
And so I keep running across example after example of the same kind of mindset. And everybody's talking about the Twitter revelations right now.
Oh
It,
yes, that's been all over the news. I was going to get to that part in just a minute, but continue on what you're doing with the part about President Trump and Alexander and everything. This is very interesting.
well, you just say to yourself, if everybody thinks the same, the amount of planning you have to do is not quite the same as when you're going, hey, we're really going to do something bad. And so, this idea of narrative poisoning, that these people have been terrified into believing something, is, and they've been persuaded by some real high quality persuaders.
Hmm.
And one of
Like
the well, one of the things that Dr. Paul also was able to do was, his office was on the 6th floor, and on 7th floor was Operation Warp Speed. And so he was often going up and, visiting and talking with the people at Operation Warp Speed. And he said it was really curious. This is something I've run across in a number of my books, and I don't quite know what to do with it other than to, you know, throw it all out there, and maybe others can make sense of it. But he said there were a lot of different groups. There were the government scientists, there were government officials, there were military people, and then there were people who really wouldn't tell you where they were from. But to Dr. Paul, he thought that they were intelligence people.
mm,
And he said it was really interesting to figure out, who are these people who are operating on Operation Warp Speed. And it kind of, as he explained it, and like I said, I'm the writer, I wasn't there. I'm abundantly documenting, and anytime I can find anything that supports him, I throw it in the book and everything. Um, but he said, looking at the lines of control in Operation Warp Speed, he said it seemed like there was the military, there were the intelligence agencies, and then there was Big Pharma. And
mm,
Big Pharma seemed to be calling the shots to the intelligence agencies and the military and the government scientists. And,
mm.
and, and so, in many of my books, what I think I'm bumping up against with the big tech books, with the big science books, is this unholy alliance between big government and big business. So it really seems like the pharma companies are really the amount of control they have over our government and our media is really unprecedented. And so one of the interesting things that came up in research for this book, and I like to stick to facts that I can point to where they come from, but here's how you should understand how powerful big science and big pharma are. So in 2020, both political parties spent $5 billion to elect a president of the United States. Okay? So keep that number in mind. Oh. However, every year, the National Institutes of Health, which is really Francis Collins and Tony Fauci, and I would say Tony Fauci is the actual leader, but let's leave that aside. Every year, they give out $30 billion in grants. And one of the things that people don't understand about Fauci is Fauci has been one of the architects of changing science, changing public science. It used to be that you would have independent groups of scientists all doing their research, and then they'd say, oh, let's fund this, let's fund that. And you get funding from a lot of different sources. What Fauci has done over his, I think, 54 years is he has made it so that people like Francis Collins and himself sit on top of the pyramid. Oh my God. They are the ones who decide how the money gets spent. And so you really have this amazing concentration of power. When you think $5 billion to elect a president of the United States, and these guys have access to $30 billion every single year, maybe the world starts to make a little bit more sense. Mm-hmm. The other thing that people don't understand is, in addition to, the NIH sending out this money, having control over scientists, you have big pharma who spends about $300 million a year lobbying Congress. Their closest competitor is oil and gas at about $150 million.
Oh my goodness.
And you have the evening news, depending upon who you talk to and whether it's election cycle or not, big pharma is about 50 to 65% of the marketing dollars going to the evening news. So when you've got people like Fauci who, love people like Bill Gates and love big pharma, and they got control over our money and where it goes, you've got big pharma buying Congress, you've got big pharma buying the network news, and this is both CNN and Fox. Mm-hmm. It's hard for people like me and people like Dr. Alexander when we publish books like this, because he's definitely got the credentials. He's one of the leading evidence-based medicine experts in the world. We could take a bunch of hits. I mean, Dr. Alexander, would wipe the floor with Dr. Fauci in science. And what they do is they simply pretend like we don't exist. Mm-hmm. It's the great silence, because, hey, if they came after us, we're good for the fight. They will not fight with us. They do not want to be on the stage with us. And that's why it's important for your audience to go out and buy these books and put reviews on Amazon, because New York Times, Wall Street Journal, they're not going to review this book.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I'm ready to buy this book, to be honest with you. I'm ready to go on the phone and do that while I get one of my representatives to order the book, and your four-legged friend, barking about, hey, let's buy this book, by the way. We'll talk about that. Yeah. And if he happens to come in and do so as well, I get one of my assistants to or the book. Let's remind everybody, you listen to the Mike Wagner Show at the MikeWagnerShow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at SonicWebStudios.com for all your needs. Look at a professional website without breaking your budget. Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable custom web designs that blow the competition away. Call today, 1-800-303-3960. That's 1-800-303-3960. Or email to support@SonicWebStudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show, get 20% off your first project. Sonic Web Studios, take your image to the next level. Also, time to give official shout out to our official sponsor of the Mike Wagner Show, international warring author Mia Molson-Zia. If you love fast-paced mysteries, you'll love Missing by Mia Molson-Zia, available on Amazon in paperback and ebook. Missing is fast-paced and intriguing with an unforgettable twist. Takes place in 4 countries, 2 strangers, 1 target, where truth is illusion and those you love will be the first go missing. It's available on Amazon in paperback and ebook. Missing by Mia Molson-Zia has garnered great reviews. And Eve 11 enjoys by Howard celebrities, including Joanna Cassie, Forbes Riley, and many others. So grab your copy today for Goes Missing by Mia Molson-Zia, available on Amazon. Also, check out the Mike Wagner Show at the MikeWagnerShow.com, or over 40 podcast platforms, heard in 100 countries, including Facebook, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Also, Anchor FM, iTunes, Google Play, Amazon. Also on HamiltonRadio.net every Thursday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 Central. Also on BitChute, Rumble, and other networks coming soon. Take us with you on any mobile device. Subscribe to the Mike Wagner Show on the YouTube channel. Follow the Mike Wagner Show on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok today. And for great gift ideas, go to Amazon.com. Check out the Mike Wagner Show podcast. T-shirts, pop sockets, throw pillows, tote bags, hoodies. Makes great gifts 24/7. Go to Amazon.com. Check out the Mike Wagner Show podcast. And for more great gift ideas, go to Amazon.com/Mia Molson-Zia for great books like Missing, Once, and Wrinkles. Also t-shirts, pop sockets, hoodies, phone cases, and more. Amazon.com/Mia Molson-Zia. Check it out today. I'll support the Mike Wagner Show on Anchor FM, PayPal, and the MikeWagnerShow.com. Make sure you do so today. We're here with the author of the book, Presidential Takedown, with Dr. Paul Elias Alexander, Kent Heckenlively here on the Mike Wagner Show. And yeah, show it all you want. So
there you go.
I don't mind you doing it at all. So
my publisher always gets mad at me. He goes, okay, any interview you do, Kent, you have to flash them up 3 or 4 times.
You know what? Let's take it to the next level. 5, 6, 7, 8. If you all hold it up, that's fine too. They'll give you a little workout too. So there you go. So we got that. And Kent, just a couple of things that kind of popped up before we all go into Twitter. I think you brought up a great point. I thought about we're having with Big Pharma, having what was it, like a 30 billion and a presidential campaign at 5 billion or something. And how much influence do they have on the FDA, or is the FDA powerless of Big Pharma? I mean, I just thought of it, having Big Pharma have almost like a mafia in a sense too. It's how much control do they have over the FDA, or do the FDA have a say that, hey, can't do this?
Well, here's something I really like to talk about, because, I'm not here for Team Red or Team Blue. I'm here for the American Republic, okay? And what has become clear to me is that this narrative poisoning is happening on both the right and the left. So let's think about this. If I were to say, what's the difference between a conservative and a liberal? A conservative is pretty comfortable saying, hey, let's give people a lot of freedom. And if they screw up, they do something wrong, let's throw the book at them. Okay, kind of a conservative way of thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Liberals are like, let's have a couple more guardrails on it. Okay, let's check things out, and let's be certain before we move. And that, hey, both approaches can work. Well, here's how both sides get poisoned. So let's take stocks, for example, and crazy things happen in corporate America. So we found the Securities and Exchange Commission, okay, supposed to regulate this trade. So all the liberals are happy because they say, oh, okay, so we got a government agency looking at these things. And the conservatives are a little bit upset about it. But what the liberals don't realize is that those people who work for the Securities Exchange Commission are going to go to work for the exact same people that they were regulating, getting 2 to 3 times the amount of money. So liberals have been shortchanged because they think the system works. And, conservatives are told oh, that Securities and Exchange Commission, it's thwarting creativity and everything, and don't worry, if something wrong happens, they'll get prosecuted. Well, the 2008 home mortgage meltdown happened, and who went to jail for that? So, so these powerful entities are co-opting both the right and the left sides of the argument in ways that a lot of people don't quite see. And that's why I'm very comfortable talking to people who are liberal about this and saying, hey, look, you want the same thing I want. You want people to be healthy. You don't want corporations hurting people. I don't want corporations hurting people. I have a little different perspective on it. But hey, I'll raise my hand and say, hey, the court systems have been corrupted. They have changed the laws so that these guys don't get punished. And if you think that the government agencies are going to take care of things, liberals, I got something to talk to you about.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really trying to craft a message for both sides of the political aisle. I'm not going to say I'm wishy-washy. I'm a moderate. I'm really pretty darn conservative, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm open to the arguments and the observations of people. I'm willing to look at any evidence you want to look at. I'm not one team or another. I'm looking at the results, and the result is, we're being lied to, and we're being divided in
Mm-hmm.
in ways that we shouldn't be divided, because the reason they're keeping us divided and fighting with each other is that so we're not looking at the real enemy.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I get what you're saying too. And of course, you talked about Dr. Alexander, having all this correct evidence, and Dr. Fauci, getting offended and everything like that, having like, meeting of minds face to face and everything like that. Do you think Dr. Fauci's findings were not as accurate as Dr. Alexander, or was it like, Dr. Fauci's was flawed, or was Dr. Fauci not as educated, or I'm trying to think of the word, or as intuitive or more detailed as Dr. Alexander?
Well, I may be kind of a unique person because I've been on the Fauci trail for about a decade now, because he really was a nemesis of Dr. Judy Mikovits, with whom I wrote and published my first book. And he has wrecked the chronic fatigue syndrome community. The fact that this disease appeared in the 1980s and we have no answer to it. He did some of the most reprehensible things in all of science by perpetuating this myth that those women who came down with chronic fatigue syndrome were simply women who couldn't hack it in the corporate world. In the HIV/AIDS community, he was looked upon as a murderer because he believed in using these AIDS medications only when they were really sick, when the disease was very progressed, rather than, as Magic Johnson did, using them upon discovery that there is an infection to keep the virus silenced. He pushed things like AZT, which were extremely toxic, instead of things like Bactrim, which were very mild in their effects. And so, and what he's done with the autism community has also been terrible. So when I look at Fauci, I say to myself, okay, he's been in charge since 1984. He was behind the effort to move childhood vaccines out of the regular court system into something called the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act and the Vaccine Court, which is one of the worst court systems ever devised. It was only devised to help big pharma keep making their money and being able to put out many vaccines without worrying about public outcry over health. So when I look at Fauci, I say he messed up HIV/AIDS. He messed up chronic fatigue syndrome. He messed up the autism epidemic. And then along came COVID, and he did the same thing that he's done in all these other epidemics. And so I just think that, he has presided over the unhealthiest generation of Americans in history. I mean, it used to be that about 12% of kids had a chronic health condition back in the 1980s. Now it's what, 52, 53%.
Ungodly.
And so I find myself going like, gee, you know, I remember being a kid in the 1970s and thinking, wow, in 2020, life is going to be great. And you know, 1970s health compared to today, you know, there's really no comparison. You know, we have all these strange diseases, all the, you know, the Alzheimer's and the dementias that are happening. This ain't normal. And it's shocking to me that public health officials can keep stoking this fear, and the public falls for it. I mean, I hate to say it that way. I wish I could say that the public has been good, but I have to say I'm quite disappointed in the public and how much like sheep they are.
Mm-hmm.
Break free from the flock, people.
Yeah, really.
Break free from the flock.
Too many sheep out there, a lot of wolves disguised in it too, you know, that sort of thing as well too. And also one more thing as well too, you know, the reports are saying that the actual virus, you know, came from China. And of course there's conflicting reports. I mean, did that really come from China, or was that too made up by Dr. Fauci by your understanding?
Well, what's great is now I've kind of developed this network of leading virologists. I mean, Dr. Mikovits, you know, Dr. Luc Montagnier was a big supporter of our books, and he actually demanded that I write a chapter about him and ending plague. And I've got Dr. Paul Alexander, and I've also worked with Dr. Andrew Huff. I worked with Dr. Robert Malone, and they're all kind of united in saying, hey, look, not only did this come from China, this escaped from the Wuhan lab, but the thing that, you know, if I'm an honest player, I'm not just pointing at the other side, right? So China's got a lot of responsibility to bear, but we have a lot of responsibility to bear too.
Mm-hmm.
We've been doing this crap. We gave them a bunch of the precursors to COVID-19. And, you know, when all of this shakes out, it's that China was stupid, we were stupid, and a lot of these scientists, I talk about them as wanting to exist as an elite above us.
Mm-hmm.
And whether they're scientists from China or the United States or Britain or Iran or Ukraine or Russia, they're kind of the same kind of crazy. They want to play with their toys, their dangerous toys in their labs, and then when they escape, they don't want to take responsibility for it. You know, and it's kind of like H1N1. Everybody hears about H1N1, but you can find some pretty reliable evidence, and I believe it's even been admitted by the United States government, that H1N1 escaped from a Russian lab. And so I find myself going, shouldn't we be talking about what the heck are these people doing in these labs?
It's how to escape in the first place. That's what you wonder.
Well, but
or
it's also
so-called.
kind of like you're playing with monsters. Okay, I mean, gain of function research means nothing less than how do I make this virus kill more or be more transmissible. Whenever you hear gain of function, you should say, that's what it is. How can I kill more? How can I infect more? That's what they're doing in their labs.
To make money that way. That's been the Fauci secret. So yeah, it's also part of the book by Kent Heckenlively, Heckenlively Presidential Takedown on the Mike Wagner Show. And what's coming up for Kent as well, too. Find out just 1 minute, along with Twitter. You listen to the Mike Wagner Show at the MikeWagnerShow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios, and brought to you by official sponsor, the Mike Wagner Show, international warring author Mia Moses of Missing. We'll be back with author Kent Heckenlively of Presidential Takedown after this time. We're back with author Kent Heckenlively of Presidential Takedown here on the Mike Wagner Show. A lot of great insight, Kent, and love to have you back. And you talk about the books. And speaking of upcoming books, so what can we expect from you in 2023 and beyond, Kent?
So I've got 2 books coming out in 2023 at least, because I don't sleep. I've got this. This was CNN. How Sex, Lies, and Spies undid the world's worst news network. That'll be coming out February 7th, 2023. And I just handed into my publisher a book that I worked with on a 4th Project Veritas whistleblower, David Johnson. And that book will be called The Diversity Scam, How the Left is Destroying the Dream of Martin Luther King. And so it's been a busy couple months, and got a couple other books that are brewing, but none of them written yet. So those 2 definitely coming out.
And we'll certainly keep our fingers crossed, and we'll definitely have you back on that one, Kent. And who do you consider biggest influence in your career?
Biggest influence in my career? That's a great question. I think that this may sound a little bit strange, but I consider Nelson Mandela to be an enormous influence on me. His philosophy of doing things. I love how he was a man with principles, and yet when he would meet with his adversaries, he would be as kind and friendly as possible, but you knew he had a spine of steel. And strangely, this will sound crazy, but my life is crazy. I was on a plane flight a little while ago, and I ended up sitting next to a 50-year diplomat who had been head of the mission in South Africa during that time. And so I said, "Oh my God, you've got to tell me Nelson Mandela stories." And he at that time, this diplomat, his name is John Blaney, and he was either going to go from South Africa to some beautiful tropical island in the Indian Ocean, or war-torn Sierra Leone, where he would be ambassador. And so he talked to Mandela about this, and Mandela said, "John, you know what I wanted to be when I was a young man?" And he goes, "No, Madiba, what did you want to be?" And he said, "I wanted to be the South African boxing champion." And he said, "That's what I wanted to be. But John, there was something I had to be, which is the life I'm living now. So I know you want to go to your beautiful tropical island, but you must go to Sierra Leone." And so he did, and he was actually one of the people who negotiated the ceasefire, of the Civil War, in which hundreds of thousands of people died. And so, when I think of who I want to be thought of, or let me say, I want to aspire to be like Nelson Mandela. I aspire to be somebody like the Dalai Lama, who, is confronting China, but is doing it with love and compassion and truth. And I stand here that, my heart is based not on hatred, not on anger, but the intent to do good in the world.
I like that philosophy. I like that. And yet you're not a boxer yet, though.
But I did take up boxing recently, so
Oh, there you go. I'm sure somebody's got to fight Mike Tyson one day. So
that's right.
That'll be another time as well, too. And what's the best advice you can give to anybody at this point?
Just keep reading. Just keep an open mind. Don't close your mind. Be friendly. Be good to the people in your life. I mean, I think a lot of times we think about like all these world-changing events. Be nice to the people you see every day.
And that's very important as well, too. And we really do need that at this time. We're with author Kent Heckenlively of Presidential Takedown here on the Mike Wagner Show with Dr. Paul Elias Alexander. Kent, a very big thank you for your time. You've been absolutely fantastic. Definitely have you on and talk about your books and everything else as well, too. And keep in touch and keep us up to date. Once again, what's your website? How do people contact you? And where can people purchase or check out your book, Presidential Takedown?
You can find my books at www.kentheckenlivelybooks.com. You can find me on Twitter at Presidential Takedown.
All right. We will certainly do so. And don't forget to show the book as well to remind everybody. So we will have that. And once again, Kent, a very big thank you for your time. You've been absolutely amazing. Learned a lot. Looking forward to having you again soon. Keep us up to date. Keep in touch. Love that back. And wish you all the best. And Kent, you definitely have a great future ahead of you.
Okay. Thanks so much.